الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين وعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. For the hastening the return of our Imam, let's recite a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Inshallah, for his health and well-being, let's recite the second one louder.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Inshallah, each and every one of us becomes a true and close companion of that Imam. Let's recite the third one even louder.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
We usually hear the name of Sayyidah Zainab sallallahu alayha from Ashura onwards, meaning in the Masa'ib we hear a few words about, let's say, what happens in Medina or when they arrive in Karbala or on the night of Ashura. Those are things that we generally mention in the context of grief, and they are reminders that bring tears to our eyes. But in terms of her role in the movement of Imam al-Hussein, we generally start to recognize her presence after the day of Ashura. If we even recognize her presence then, if we recognize a role for her then. And I think some have trouble with that because they have a lot of respect and they want to show respect, but when they're looking at history and they're thinking about what happened even post Ashura, they hear about a speech, a lecture perhaps delivered, or a couple of statements that she made. And just looking at those short glimpses or short pieces that we have of her, people have trouble seeing the role, or a substantial role, besides saying things that are going to cause us to cry. And of course that is the case with the whole movement of Imam Hussein in a different way, because we don't recognize it for what it is. In other words, that movement was there, it has objectives, it was thought out, not after the death of Yazid. I mentioned this earlier on in our talks. It's a completely wrong analysis of history to think that after Yazid became the Khalifa, suddenly Imam Hussein saying, oh, we're not going to pledge allegiance to Yazid. No. The pledge of allegiance to Yazid was there before Muawiyah died. Imam Hussein stood up against that before that time. And it didn't even start then. It was even before then. The war against Muawiyah and the Umayyads never stopped. The treaty that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, led by Imam Hassan, accepted was never the acceptance of Muawiyah as a legitimate ruler. That was never what that was. What it was that they agreed and they gave their word that they're not going to fight Muawiyah as long as he is alive. And they set certain conditions for him they knew he is not going to abide by. Anyhow, just throwing some of those in there to remind us that we have a long ways before we actually understand Imam Hussein's movement, despite the fact that every year we have, well, for some we have not just 40 days, we have 2 months and 10 days. You go all the way up to the 9th of Rabiul Awwal. All these programs are held in the name of Imam Hussein, and we still clueless what the movement of Imam Hussein was all actually about. But when it comes to post-Ashura and the role of Zainab and what that whole thing was about, going to Karbala for Arba'in, we haven't really analyzed that. So for those who actually recognize a role for Zainab salamullahi alayha, we start hearing it Ashura onwards. What about before Ashura? I'll leave you whatever you've heard, and I'm sure you've heard some things. Inshallah, you'll think about it more and learn more. What about before? I'll give another example. Perhaps that's going to help us get the point that we're trying to make here. What's the role of the lady Fatima Zahra before the demise of the Holy Prophet? Any ideas? What did Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha do for the movement of the Prophet? Was she involved at all? Did she have a role? Was there something she did? Or is it that no, she's just an unknown figure? At best, maybe we know a few words about her worship or ibadah, her spiritual state. She was daughter of the Prophet. Even the spiritual state is just something, apparently, according to our understanding, something that has to do with lineage. She's just the daughter of the Prophet, which is not true. Does she have a role? Does she not? We know post-demise of the Prophet, she had a very central role in bringing the Ummah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And that's a discussion, inshallah, for Fatimiyya, for us to remind ourselves and explore further, try to build on what we currently know of that. But we don't really look at before that. What's there? For Sayyid Zainab, what's there before Ashura? Was she just tagging along? The way some zakirs or reciters or whatever you call them in their language say, she just loved her brother Hussein, and that's why, as a sister, and not because of the Imam, just a brother-sister type relationship, and she wanted to be with him, and she knew that this is going to happen to him, and her father and her grandfather said that you need to be with her, that's it. It's very... Did she do things? Did she do things before then, when she was with Amir al-Mu'mineen in Kufa, before the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Did she do anything, or she just... Says Allah, please. The first thing I want to do tonight is to make that a serious question in your mind for those who actually go and do research. And I hope more and more of us do that. Go try to, you can at least Google it, maybe something will pop up in your browser. Sometimes we don't even do that much research on Islamic topics. Let's at least see what the Wahhabis say about some things. Maybe it'll cause us to think. We don't do any research. Think about that. Is that a legitimate question? Was Zainab someone that was just an ordinary, she had nothing to do with anything, she was just a person, and suddenly, post-Ashura, you started seeing things. She's not active, involved, or nothing. Ask that question. Think about it. And try to follow up with it. Ask people. Look for it in books. See what you can find. And then when you think about this, when you have that question, and then you get bits and pieces of history, bits and pieces of information, then if you have that question, you start seeing if any of those can start giving you an answer. And I will tell you, I don't have a complete answer. I want to try to explore some of the ideas that we have, some of what we see, and try to analyze that and come up with an understanding, hopefully that'll help us all. We can all learn from this lady, Aqidat Bani Hashim, inshallah. Say this salawat, please. History doesn't record every little detail that happened. We don't have history books that record every little, you have 23 years of the life of the Prophet. How much of that is found in, I mean, if you were to just write down every little detail of the duration of that time, you'll have to have pretty large volumes of books to cover that material. What we have is not Siratu Ibn Hisham, the 4 volumes with the print and the extra paper, and the print isn't too small either. It's 4 volumes, they add up to that thick. Okay, well, that big and that thick. Okay, four volumes together. Sirat Ibn Hisham is one of the ones who's written this, one of the books that we have. If you look at some of the other books that have redundant narrations, you have one narration and then it's repeated once, twice, 3, 4 times from different chain of transmissions. If you reduce the book to the actual narration and a few chains of transmissions, you will see that the volumes will get reduced significantly. With some of the Imams, we get even less than that. So there's not much. With regards to the Sayyid Zainab, I haven't found too much where I can say, okay, this quote is there, that quote is there, this activity is mentioned, that activity is mentioned. So we're going to have to make do with what we have. And this is the part of history that in the Muslim world we need a little more of. And the best expert on it that I have found, and I've looked at the works of different scholars on analyzing facts we have of history, trying to give us a more complete picture of what it was like. The best person I have found is Al-Khamenei, not because I like him for other reasons, but honestly I've checked different sources, and the only one that I found that does a very good job at that level that I have not found anyone else is him. I've checked Rasul Jafari on some others who are known to have a little bit of that at least, but when I compare the works, it's not really comparable. We need a lot of this. Use what we understand of people in our lives and so on and so forth, and then bits and pieces of information that we have of history, and then come up with an analysis, an understanding of what probably happened, who was the cause of certain things. So that's a method we need to use and apply. If we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to benefit from these characters, from these figures in history. This doesn't go only for the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. This applies to previous prophets as well. The Quran, which is the most legitimate source of history for pre-prophetic time, meaning our Prophet, is the most authentic, legitimate source for history. If you don't think about what is being said and try to analyze, you're not going to be able to benefit as much from the stories mentioned in the Holy Quran. So with that, let's see what we have available and try to put it together and see what we can get from that. Recite salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We know that Imam Hussein Salamullah alayhi had a very difficult time convincing people to join him in going towards Kufa. Whether it was in Medina when he started the move, or it was in Mecca. When he spoke to people, heads of tribes, companions of the Prophet, explaining the situation, and how this is not a time to sit and do nothing, not rise. But he had trouble convincing people, not because they didn't understand the logic, but because they saw the difficulty, the obstacles in the way, and they saw it to be highly unlikely for the move to succeed in creating a blow against Yazid and not allow him to rule, which was what essentially Imam Hussein Salamullah alayhi was saying. You shouldn't have a Khalifa like that ruling over you. That's one of the main punchlines of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein had trouble convincing people. when we look at that, when we talk about Imam Hussein convincing people, recite salawat, please. Ask Allah to help me explain this properly. There's a problem with how we look at history and also, of course, contemporary times. And that is, I think the first thing that comes to all of our minds when we talk about Imam Hussein convincing people, you think about men. Automatically, the women are not part of the conversation. Women are not being thought of. They're not being considered. Whether they understood, they didn't understand. Did Imam Hussein try to convince? Did he not? You're thinking, you hear names like Abdullah bin Abbas, Abdullah bin Umar, and some other figures that Abdullah bin Zubayr. These are known figures, influential figures. And so I think the thought process generally causes us to just automatically go, and it's war, right? We think of Imam Hussein went there, it was a battle, and so on and so forth. And we think of men. Well, Imam Hussein showed that that's not the case, right? When he was going, if he wanted to do that, he would have left his family behind. If he thought the way we think, then he should have said, well, this is a men's thing. Then, okay, leave the family behind, leave the women behind. We're going to go towards Kufa. It's probably going to be a bloody war. Let's leave everyone behind. It's a men's thing. Well, that's not what he did. That's not his understanding. Very evidently. We see traces in history of women being involved in convincing their husbands to go. And then husbands turning around and divorcing them and saying, you go back home, I'll go with Hussein. Like Zuhayd ibn Qin, this is the situation with him. He wasn't willing to go and speak to Imam Hussein. His wife, like, shame on you. Hussein is trying to see you and speak to you, and you don't want to go. He ends up going, and then he's convinced to go, and then he comes back and says, you go back to Basra, go back to your family, I'm going to go with Hussein, this is it. Whether that was legitimate, not legitimate, why that happened, I have tons of questions about that. But I don't want to focus on the latter part of that, but the first part of it, the convincing part. So you have a female there that had an understanding that caused something to happen in the context of Karbala, and that is to convince someone that actually went along with Imam Hussein and joined him. That's a significant. Even everyone, you say 72, like that would have been 71 if it wasn't for this female. What was the thought process of all the women, especially Zainab, and we'll see why we're focusing on that, in going to Karbala? Think, now let's add an element in here. When you want to go somewhere, you want to come to the center with your family, how do we go about and do that? Sometimes the family doesn't like to come. Let's say the husband decides that he wants to come, the family doesn't want to come. How does that work? You end up coming, do you not end up coming, do you come with your family, you don't come with your family? When it's a difficult task, how does that work? Just think about the role of, for those who are married, for men, and then for women themselves who are married, or their daughters, wives, mothers. Think about doing things as a family and then their role in making something happen or not happen. You want to have a program at your house. You like to have it as the man of the house. But what if the woman, the wife, the mother, the sisters, whoever is involved, and actually they will have a good portion of the burden on them if they don't like it, if they don't want to do it? How does that work? Is it possible? Does it not work? If they end up giving in, you keep pressing them, which at least at times, is not right the way we do it. But you sort of, force them to agree to that. How does that work compared to having an event where the women in the house are involved in it and they are willingly involved in it. They want to do it. You've seen the difference. I'm sure you've experienced. You know what I'm talking about, right? It makes sense?
Yes.
Now that's a one-time thing. Right? If you decide to tomorrow, if you want to decide to relocate from Seattle to another city, how much more important does her, talking to men obviously now, a little more so they can understand this, and sisters can understand this as well, I think. And more than the brothers, but let's get this across to the brothers. If you want to relocate, and your wife is not okay with that, what are you going to do? Is that going to happen, or is it not going to happen? It's not going to happen. I'm sure the sisters are like, yeah, right. You do whatever you want, we have to always follow. But no, seriously, when you're doing something as a family, if you want to relocate, it becomes a little more difficult. So you want to go from Seattle, you want to move to Houston. Okay. From this weather to Houston weather. And your wife has her friends here, her family members here, everything here. Now you want to relocate to Houston, she knows nobody, no friends, nothing. And then you have children as well, which are no longer children, they're in their teens. Now they have a lot of friends, and they have everything going on here. Now you want to leave. If they're not on board, what happens? If you decide instead of going to Houston, you want to go to Iraq, and go settle in Iraq. Areas where there's conflict currently. Alhamdulillah, most of Iraq at least, conflict is over. But let's say, during the time of the conflict, a brother decides, he's looking at the news like, I am needed in Iraq, I come from Iraq, I want to go back and this is the time, I need to do this. Well, the family's not okay with it. How is that going to go down? See, I'm trying to get us to understand based on our own experience, so then we go look back at history, and we start understanding this a little better. It won't happen. They're not going to end up... I know plenty of people, like, okay, I don't come from an Iraqi background, my dad's from Iran, I have come from Iran, I've seen that. Post-revolution, the brothers had decided, okay, let's go. Why would like, no, we're not going. We're staying. Or the reverse. The brother's like, look, I don't want to go. So he's like, no, we're going back. Okay. They end up going back. Right? This is, I think, something everyone is familiar with. Now, look at Imam Hussein moving towards Mecca and towards Kufa. What do you think the role of women was in that situation? Let's say, okay, Imam Hussein just told him, just put yourself in that situation, try to think about this. What did Imam Hussein do? He went to his wife or wives and sister, like, okay, Zainab, be ready, we're going to go. Where, what? Don't say anything, let's go. It's like sometimes how we do it. Okay? Don't ask any questions, let's go. Is that how they did things? These women, like, not aware of the situation? They're clueless, just taking care of children's diapers and food, and that's it. And then suddenly, husband comes in, let's go. Like, okay, no questions asked. I don't know where we're going, but we're going. Is that the situation? Same with his family, with Zainab? Or is it a different situation? And then try to think about this as well. Okay, let's say you talk to them and they're like, okay, if it's necessary, then we'll go. We'll come. Right? Or, okay, God has said we need to go. Think of all these different scenarios. So then you go from Medina. What is the date? It's towards the end of Rajab. You have Sha'ban, you're on the way, you go to Mecca. In Mecca, you know the government is after you. That was information that was very well known. The family knows about this. So they're in Mecca, this was the situation. What are they thinking? How are they behaving? There's two situations. One is that your family, so think that you're part of the movement of Imam Hussein, and you're there, your family's there. Your family's unhappy, they're afraid that something's going to happen to you, something's going to happen to their children. Right? They're worried, they're concerned about that. What's going to happen every time you go back home? What type of conversation are you going to have? You're going to have a negative conversation. You're going to have to keep going back and trying to explain, look, we have to do this, we have to do that, and so on and so forth. It's taklif, it's responsibility. And if she's not on board, you keep going back. It becomes more difficult. Then you have to leave Mecca towards Kufa, and then you start getting Muslim. This happened to Muslim Ibn Aqil. He said 18,000 pledges of allegiance. Now that's changed. He's been beheaded. This has happened. Family's there. They hear this. Hur ibn Yazid comes. The family sees this. So once you start thinking a little more realistically, you start realizing. So think about this. Yeah, what was their position? Were they just okay? Were they just tagging along and not really understanding what's going on, like, being pulled in this direction or the other direction? Or they were against it, they were being pulled in that direction? Or they were actually willingly, not because Hussein is their husband or father or brother, because of understanding. And I'll tell you, that love for your husband or your brother goes so far. To a certain degree you can go with that. Once it starts getting more and more difficult, then those things are not going to be strong enough to pull you. Or at least, if you go along, there are not going to be enough reasons for you to actually realize what you need to do and do it. You're always going to be negative, you're always going to feel bad about it, and that's going to reflect in your language, and it's going to affect the decisions, the mood of those who we see. The men that we see, who says, Ali Akbar did this, Abbas did that, Hussein did this companion did that, and so on and so forth. With this understanding, then go read what Zainab did after that. There's more records of what she said afterwards, what she did afterwards in those harsh circumstances. What does it sound like? Does it sound like someone that didn't know what's going on and just joined? Or does it sound like someone that was a very, very important, unseen member of the movement? I go with the second. It's clear to me. It's very evident. Now, we talked about women, now Zainab sallallahu alayha, specifically. Should I salawat, please? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just like amongst men, there is the Imam, and then there's others who follow. And the Imam is the strongest. Right? He's leading people. Others who are following, at times, depending on their level of faith, could start having doubts. They start having questions. When difficulties come, you start having questions in mind. Sometimes it's with the adults, and sometimes it's with the children, and we don't take that into consideration. We had another talk in somebody's house, in one of the brothers or family's homes, and we talked a little bit about that. Imam Hussein intentionally brought the children there. So now think about this. Women, and you have children, different ages, and they're not having fun. Right? what's happening there. There are amongst women those who are stronger in faith as well, stronger in understanding as well. And one of the important activities that such women have is convincing other women, not men, other women of why what's happening is happening, why this is the right direction, why we need to do this, why we need to do that. They're not seen. We don't get their conversations recorded in history. We don't have those conversations recorded in history. But naturally, looking at the scene, looking at what happens, we understand that this is human nature. Okay? These were human beings. Some were less strong compared to others, and you have figures like Zainab, who is strong. And later on, of course, she affects not just the women. We're talking about pre-Ashura. Post-Ashura is different. She needs to come out now, be more public. We hear some of that. But pre-Ashura, based on experience, we can understand that there needs to be adults who are clear on direction, clear on their position, clear on why they're doing what they're doing, firmly believing in it, and convincing other female adults, besides the men. The importance is on the female adults. So they all remain as a group, as a community, as the followers of Imam al-Hussein sallallahu alayhi, they remain on the path with him. With the children as well. When you get children getting unhappy, you know how that feels. Right? When you want to, going back to the examples that I mentioned, you hold a program at your house and you have little children, infants, 4 or 5-year-olds, 10, 12-year-olds, 15, 16-year-olds, they're tired and they're crying, they're saying things, they're unhappy, which is natural. That has an effect, it has a psychological effect on the parent, and especially the ones who deal with the more, which naturally, women, mothers, and together, they, sisters, mothers, wives, they take care of the children. They're getting most of this. So it has an impact on the way they feel as well. You could be strong yourself, but then when you have all this pressure mounting from children, it starts affecting you emotionally. You're seeing that they're suffering. When you see others suffering because of your decisions, you start having questions about, why are you doing this? Is this right? Should we leave? It's a given. Imam Hussein wanted them there. But don't you think that this would have naturally, it should have caused some of the women to say, can we take the children somewhere? This is a battlefield. They had to be there. So to be set on that, to be consistent with that, to keep going despite the challenges, it requires strength on their part. And if that was going to be a burden that Imam Hussein would be burdened with, or the other men would be burdened with, that women were not on board with it, they had trouble, they couldn't handle it themselves, they kept having to bring it to the men, to Imam Hussein, and then on top of everything else, he's got to try to comfort the women as well. If anything, we would say, well, that's another burden that adds on to the burdens of Imam Hussein. That's not what we see in Karbala. We don't have evidence of that, and what we see post-Karbala tells us it was otherwise. These women understood what they're doing, they wanted to be there. With the difficulties coming their way, post-Ashura, they made difficult decisions that brought them more difficulty. They could have avoided all of that. No, they chose all of those. That tells us, with this analysis, that all these women, they were on board, they understood on their own, not just following blindly. No, they have their own understanding, and they on their own understood the importance of this, and they were strong supporters of this, and that support not only allowed them to be there and to allow that to happen, it affects the spirit and the psychological state of the men who were present there. I don't know, I did my best. I know it was not.
You did very good.
No, it's not justice to the ladies. It's not justice to the ladies in Taliban. You think about it more. Okay? These are some thoughts. Think about this. Make it more real to yourself. And then go back to those historic pieces of evidence, those statements, and then you start realizing, no, there's a lot more. So the point is, so now, what I want to say, my understanding is this. The women involved in that movement were consciously making the decision to be there, aware of the consequences, considered that the thing that God wants, and they knew what the results were supposed to be, based on which they did, and they decided to do what they did. This is my understanding of the women in Karbala. Okay? And their decision affected what happened in the battlefield. It affected what happened post-battlefield. It affected the days on the journey. It affected the days in Mecca. It affected the days from Medina to Mecca. It affected the entire trip and everything that happened there. It's just not seen in history. Meaning, there's nothing recorded of that. The visible part of it is what you hear Hussein Salamullah alayhi saying. That's the visible part. The other visible part is that they were present. That's it. And you have to do the math for yourself and figure this out. Why is it important? There's a lot of lessons that we can take from this. A whole lot of them. And I don't want to focus on something that is, to say that, well, women need to have. I think we're at that stage where that's not going to, it's not a necessary conversation. We already know. Or maybe it is. Maybe some other time we need to talk about this, the role of women. We have, and it is something we need to discuss. I don't want to focus on that right now. What I do want to focus on is this. There's a difference between the culture of Islam, the culture of Iman, the Quranic culture, the prophetic culture of doing things, and the dunyawi, the material culture of doing things. And the best examples of that are women in our history, and even today. And that is, in the Islamic, prophetic, Quranic culture, you do things not for recognition by fellow human beings. You don't do things to try to get the spotlight. You don't do things for it to be recorded that this person did this or the other. That's not what you're focused on. What people recognize or don't recognize is not important. What he recognizes, what he sees, is what's important. Right? Material culture, dunyawi culture, no. If it's not recognized, it doesn't exist. There's no value to it. Value goes to something which is recognized and seen. It's in the spotlight. If it's not there, it's not seen. And what do you want seen? The one who does whatever it is that they do, or has whatever it is that they have. So for example, in the context of our discussion, So as I said, the best example is women. Dunyawi culture is this. A woman who has beauty, it has to be recognized. It must be seen. Where? In society. In public. It's got to be recognized. It's got to be seen. It's got to be in the spotlight. If she's got talent in management, in administration, it must be seen. It must be recognized. Where? Then. People need to see that. If it's not recognized there, then it doesn't exist. There's no value to it. Her understanding, her spiritual development, that's even something that has to be recognized, These days, people want their spiritual development to be recognized by others. That's what it is, unfortunately, guys. We've been affected by the material culture, the Dunyawi culture. The Quran says, say salawat, please. إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي وإن تخفوها. Who knows the rest of it? Surah Baqarah. وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء, if I got it right, فهو خير. If you give charity and it's seen, it's good. But if you hide it and you give it to them without it being recognized, it's better for you. It's better for you. If her political understanding is not recognized in public, where it's associated with her, then because the recognition is not there, it doesn't really matter. Is that salawat, please? But Allah has naturally created women. Again, let's not forget, I keep emphasizing this. I'm using women. Women history and women today. I'll try to throw a few points in about that as well, because this is something we have in our sources about the creation of men and women, right? But we get the point and we apply it to all of us, not just to women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created women where they are the butun, as some have used the term. The unseen part. The one scholar used the term that if you looked at an almond, the shell is the man and the nut within, which is the main part, is the woman. These are terms that our ulama have used, the ones who actually understood this. If you look at whether it's our ahkam or naturally in society, just connecting all the dots, you'll see a lot of that. I'll just give you that line and let you think about that. Say salawat, please. The work of the Lady Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha, is not recognized as it was. What you see of it, this is very delicate, is what you see of the Prophet, and what you see of Amir al-Mu'mineen, what you see of Imam Hassan, what you see of Imam Hussein. Did we get that? What you see and you attribute to the Prophet, to Amir al-Mu'mineen, to Imam Hassan, to Imam Hussein, manifests the greatness of the Lady Fatima Zahra. This isn't some lecture where Zakir is trying to make a point here and get not a haters here. Okay. very, very extremely serious, and I hope God puts the right words in my mind and in my tongue. We have plenty, by the way, of hadith and sources available to us that guide us to this understanding. She doesn't want recognition. She never wanted recognition. Her behavior, her understanding has affected the Muslim Ummah, not post-Prophet, which is definitely something that she impacted the community where it's recognized. Now you suddenly see it. But there's a lot of other things that are not seen. They're not recognized. But it reflects in the Prophet. It reflects in Amir al-Mu'minin. It reflects in Imam Hassan. It reflects in Imam Hussein. Some have used the language of hadith. كذا هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. Center is Fatima. What do you see? What do you see externally? You see the Prophet, his wording, so you see Amir al-Mu'minin, you see Imam Hassan, you see Imam Hussein. Reflecting from Fatima. There's effects there. The way she behaves, the way she understands, the way she treats them, the way they talk to her about what's happening, the way she supports her father after her mother. Khadija, who was the one who supported the Prophet at home. That type of support is a different type of support. These are things that are not, they're mentioned in the words of the Prophet, by the way, but we don't connect the dots. We don't see that. When the Prophet said, Abiha, to Lady Fatima Zahra, it's not just something that's casually said. Before Ashura, Zainab is not seen. What you see of Hussein and the men there is a reflection of not only Zainab, the other women there as well. Their work is reflected in what you hear. All those words from the Imam, from the men there, all the behavior you see, the chivalry you see in the battlefield reflects recognition we see, we get is where, but it reflects that. Why did they do all of that? They didn't get the recognition. This is the point. Even after all this time, we're not seeing that work being recognized. But it's interesting how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings it out in a different way. He recognizes the work of great people, and he brings it out. I'll tell you one thing. Ayatollah Khamenei mentioned this with regards to the war and with regards to the Lady Fatima Zahra, and then I'll add something about Zainab. One of the greatest reminders for the believers in the war to give them a stronger spirit, to make them more selfless, to make them sacrifice, and all of that was the memory of the Lady Fatima Zahra. In the most difficult of times, tawassul to the Lady Fatima Zahra. Now, this I knew from before, but there's one statement from the leader, he says, which is very accurate. He says, and he was part of this, they had people going amongst the believers who were fighting to propagate, to remind them, help them with spirituality, and so on and so forth. He said, we were involved in that. And I can tell you for a fact This connection with the Lady Fatima al-Zahra was not the work of any of us. Naturally, within the hearts of these believers, you started finding statements, reminders about the Lady Fatima al-Zahra, and the connection that was found there. And he correctly identified it's the work of the Lady Fatima al-Zahra herself. It's her doing. You can't pinpoint nobody propagated that, nobody promoted that. You know what the outcome of that was? The work that she did that we don't even know. We're trying to find traces of that. In books of history, we can barely find it. But it's registered with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 1400 years later, the memory of that lady gives hundreds of thousands of men the spirit to go and sacrifice themselves. This is besides the effect on the mothers of the shuhada, the wives of the shuhada, that help them. You know, we're just looking at this one example. This applies. Now with the whole thing that happened in Syria, the motivation that got the likes of Sheikh Muhsin Hujjaji to go over there was Sayyida Zainab. Constantly, Kulluna Abbasuhi wa Zainab, isn't that what was being said? 1400 years later, the memory of Zainab is what defeats $7 trillion spent in religion, according to Trump. The memory of Zainab. This is God recognizing the work of somebody. She's not looking for recognition. What happened at that time in the court of Yazid, all that right. But that's not Zainab. Zainab lived an entire life before that point. You and I have no clue what that is. That's what made Zainab Zainab. And then you see that little last part, the last year or two of her life, Ashura and onwards. Okay? Do things for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let Him recognize it. When He recognizes it, even in this world, He will bring it out on a scale that you couldn't even imagine. This is Islamic spirit. And you know what's more interesting? That again, it's not like specific things about the Lady Fatima al-Zahra. It's just an incident in the street and behind the door. It's just a couple of things. Like how long did it take? You ask all these people that have that feeling towards the Lady Fatima al-Zahra, okay, can you give a lecture? Just write down everything you know about her. I don't think it'll be 20 pages. I don't think you can get 20 pages. What is this? What does it do with the heart of these people? Although it's not seen again. See? It's not seen. We don't know what it is. We don't know what she did exactly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes that in this way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Generally, women are like that, as I said, even today. The work of women, their mothers, their wives, they're not seen. The effect of it is in every single one of your work. When you go to work and you're sane and you can do work right, because you have the support of your family. It's not seen. We see that money comes, the breadwinner is, for a lot of the traditional families, it's the men. But don't get that wrong. If God recognizes, this is the last one, if God recognizes it, then inshallah we get to recognize it. We recognize the work of the people that are behind the scenes, and they're not seen, inshallah. Most of all, that fact of the Islamic culture, the Quranic culture, of doing things for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to recognize. Nobody else. Nobody else. Let no one else know about it. And don't worry about it. If He knows, sallallahu alayhi wa abdillah. Sallallahu alayhi sallallahu alayka ya mazlum ayyuha ash-shahid bi Karbala atshana. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, my beloved Imam al-Hussein. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, my beloved oppressed Imam. The Imam that was slaughtered by the shores of the Euphrates, while his mouth was dry of thirst. روحي فداك. I don't know I mentioned the lady Fatima to Zahra. If you allow me, I want to go to Medina and mourn her Lord. Sallallahu alayki ya mumtahanatu mumtahanakillah. يا ممتحنة امتحنك الله قبل أن خلقك فوجدك من امتحنك صابرا. روحي فداك. Her grave is not even recognized. When you go to Medina, you wonder where to go to visit her. You just walk around Masjid al-Nabi. You walk close to Nabi. Ya Zahra. Where did these things happen? Sallallahu alayki ruhi fidak. You want to recognize Fatima to Zahra and see what she meant for Ali ibn Abi Talib. Look at his words when he buried the lady Fatima to Zahra. لقد استرجعت الوديعة O Prophet, what you entrusted me with has been returned to you. Amir al-Mu'mineen has a few words with the Prophet. How can I be patient after this, Ya Rasulullah? I think it is accurate to say the accounts that say Amir al-Mu'mineen would have to go to a well in the middle of the night and speak to the well about what he's facing is true. He no longer has Fatima to speak to. Sallallahu alayk ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, ruhi fidak. Sallallahu alayki ya aqilatu bani Hashim. It's difficult for me. I'll say a few words, inshallah. You will connect with her better, inshallah. The events after Karbala are very difficult, especially on Zainab. She needs to protect Ali ibn al-Husayn, Imam Zain al-Abidin, protect the children, protect the deen with her words. Stay strong. Women are more emotional. God has given beautiful emotions to women. Ruhi fidak. I think the sisters understand better, perhaps, how strong she must have been when she saw the head of Imam al-Husayn before the feet of the Mal'un Ubaydullah bin Ziyad. There is an account that even he used the stick on the lips of Imam al-Husayn. He did that to break Zainab. She saw it and she was strong. She did cry though, but she didn't break. That's the strength of Zainab. Sallallahu alayhi wa ala ummik wa akhik. لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلب. اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم بالزهراء وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها بك يا الله 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 يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك وعلى محبة أوليائك. Allah hasten the return of our Imam. Help us become his true and close companions. Help all those who are helping their cause, helping the cause of the Imam of our time, especially our righteous ulama, our maraja, especially our leader, Ya Allah, Forgive us all of our sins, forgive our parents and grandparents and relatives, all believers, those who are alive, those who left this world. Ya Allah, grant all of us our hajat, our needs, our requests, cure all the ill from amongst us, especially those who are more in need, and help all those of the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, and of the oppressed people of the world who are suffering from oppression, from hardships and difficulties, and relieve all the people of the world of the oppressions they're facing. النبي وآله رحمه الله قال الفاتحة